Hello, I am Amber, and I am 21 years old. My father had always been a quiet man. Not distant, no. He was loving in his own reserved way, but quiet in the sense that he carried the weight of the world silently on his shoulders. He believed problems should be solved before they were spoken, that the burden of worry should never pass down to the rest of the family. So when he started spending more time in his study with the door closed, I didn't question it at first. At the time, I assumed he was busy with work. My father was the type who took pride in every dollar he earned. He worked in logistics, managing supply chains for medium-sized companies. Not glamorous, not headline-worthy, but stable, reliable. And he was good at it, meticulous with numbers, disciplined with time, and frugal with money. And then something changed. It started small, as these things often do. He spent longer hours behind that closed door. The glow of the monitor sometimes seeped into the hallway late at night when I went to get a glass of water. My mother would ask him if he was okay, and he'd always nod. Just catching up, he'd say. Just a bit more work tonight. I noticed he'd grown secretive with his phone, shielding it when messages came in, brushing away notifications with a flick and a frown. Sometimes I caught a glimpse of charts and flashing green numbers, websites that didn't look anything like the software he normally used for work. But I told myself it wasn't my business. Weeks passed, and the unease grew. Then came the shift in mood. My father, usually a calm and composed man, began showing signs of restlessness. He'd pace the kitchen during dinner, check his phone mid-conversation, and barely touch his plate. He smiled less. He started drinking coffee late at night, something he had never done in his life. I heard him whispering once, late into the night, the sound of his voice strained and unfamiliar. A tone of tension clung to him that he tried so hard to mask. I remember standing just outside the study door, listening to fragments of sentences. Yes, I moved it already. No, I understand the risk. How long until we see returns? It wasn't work. Still, no one said anything. We all saw the signs, but in a house that had long prized emotional restraint, we waited. We waited for him to speak, to open up, to explain. But the silence held. It wasn't until I noticed the changes in our finances that the worry turned into alarm. My mother handled most of the household budgeting. She was good at it, careful, cautious, and methodical. But one evening, I overheard her muttering while balancing the accounts. That's strange, she whispered. Why is the savings so low? I saw the crease in her brow deepen. She called the bank the next day. I remember the tightness in her voice afterward, how her hands trembled as she stirred her tea. Still, nothing was said to me. But I could feel the tension now, thick and unspoken. It wasn't until 3 weeks later that I finally understood. I came home early from school one day. My last class had been canceled, and heard my father talking loudly in the study. His voice, usually calm and measured, was agitated and raised. You told me the money would be accessible by Friday. I already wired another $15,000. That was the agreement. My breath caught in my throat. I stepped quietly past the door, careful not to be heard. I didn't know what was happening, but I knew it was bad. That night, I tried to talk to him. I waited until after dinner, until the dishes were done and the air had cooled. Dad, I began, is everything okay? He didn't meet my eyes. He simply said, yes, and left the room. It was a lie. I could feel it in my bones. From that point on, I became an observer, not just a daughter, but a silent witness to something unraveling behind closed doors. I started checking the bank app when I could. The balances were dropping fast. Our emergency fund was nearly empty. The college savings account had been touched. Even the mortgage payments were delayed. One day, I searched the term I had seen over his shoulder. Capital X. What I found made my stomach turn. It was a sleek-looking trading platform promising high returns through AI-driven investments. It boasted success stories and fake testimonials, complete with professional videos and curated charts. But on forums, the truth spilled out. Fraud, scam, theft. Stories of people losing tens of thousands, vanishing accounts, no customer service, no money back. I didn't say anything that night. I sat alone in my room, staring at the screen, reading one horror story after another. I felt my heart break, not just from fear but from knowing that my father, the man who had spent his life protecting us, had been caught in a trap he didn't even see coming. The next day, I tried again. Dad, please talk to me. He paused, just for a second. Then he sighed, a sound so heavy it seemed to carry every failure he had ever felt. But again, he said nothing, and so the silence continued. There is a moment, a single, irreversible moment, when the weight of silence becomes too much to bear. Ours came one gray Tuesday morning, as rain tapped steadily against the windows and the air in the kitchen hung to still. My father hadn't touched his coffee. My mother sat quietly, hands wrapped around her mug as if it could warm the fear settling in her chest. I sat across from them, eyes flicking between their faces, waiting. That was the day he told us. He didn't speak like someone explaining a mistake. He spoke like a man describing a storm he had willingly walked into, convinced he'd emerge richer on the other side. His words were soft but carried the tremble of someone on the verge of collapse. He told us about Capitalix, how he'd first seen it online, how it seemed sophisticated and professional, and how the early returns had looked promising. At first, he had only invested $500, then $5,000, and when the interface showed his money growing, he kept going. He didn't tell us when it turned. He glossed over the part where the platform began asking for verification deposits and account unlocking fees. He mumbled something about retention clauses and bonus cycles. When he finally realized it was all fake, the total amount he'd sent was $85,000. My mother didn't speak. Her face had gone pale, as if the numbers themselves had drained the blood from her body. I felt a ringing in my ears and a growing pressure behind my eyes. I wanted to scream, to ask how he could have done this without telling us, and to ask why he hadn't seen the signs. But I didn't. None of us did. The truth had finally been spoken, and it filled the room like smoke. He apologized over and over, and we listened. Because what else could we do? But the worst hadn't come yet. 3 days later, he received an email. The sender claimed to be a blockchain security specialist, someone who had allegedly helped thousands recover stolen investment funds. His name was Derek Voss. He wrote in perfect professional English, offered a free consultation, and included screenshots of past recoveries. He even claimed to work with financial authorities in Zurich. It sounded too good to be true. I said as much, but desperation is louder than reason. And my father, desperate to undo the damage he'd caused, answered the email. The hacker, as we would later call him, was charming. He didn't demand money outright. He built trust. He sent detailed instructions and talked about tracking crypto wallets and about deep tracing algorithms and layered fund movements. I didn't understand half of it. My father did, or at least convinced himself he did. Their first real conversation happened over a secure messaging app. Afterward, my father called it promising. By the end of the week, he had sent $10,000 in fund tracing fees. The hacker promised that within 10 business days, a portion of the stolen funds would be routed back through a secure escrow system. 10 days passed. Nothing came. The hacker apologized. He blamed bank delays, intermediary holdups, and multi-jurisdictional complexities. It all sounded official, plausible even. Another fee was requested, this time $12,500 for a smart contract override. It would be the last one, he said. He even sent a document marked with fake signatures and notary stamps. My father didn't consult us. He just wired the money. The collapse accelerated. He didn't notice the signs that I did, how the hacker used slightly different phrasing each time, how emails sometimes came from different domains, and how the terminology kept shifting. I tried to bring it up. He got defensive. He said I didn't understand, that he was close to retrieving everything. I saw in his eyes not just hope but fear, the fear that if this failed, there was nothing left to hope for. He had already mortgaged part of his pension. The money we were supposed to use to fix the roof and cover my brother's dental surgery gone. More payments followed. $18,000, then $22,000. The requests escalated as the explanations grew more tangled. The hacker began referencing compromised accounts, claiming our bank was part of a larger laundering scheme. He warned of legal consequences unless more fees were paid to scrub our involvement. When my father hesitated, the hacker sent a fake notice from a cybersecurity division complete with a fabricated seal claiming that unless the final payment of $48,000 was processed within 72 hours, our family accounts would be frozen. He panicked. That night, I found my mother sobbing in the laundry room. She had discovered that a second loan had been taken out in her name. She hadn't even known. The money was already gone, transferred to a wallet ID I would later trace to Eastern Europe. Everything unraveled in a matter of days. My father finally broke down when the agent stopped replying entirely. The messages stopped coming. The email addresses went dark. The chat server was deleted. The blockchain wallets were emptied and abandoned. I remember watching him refresh the screen over and over, waiting for a message that would never arrive. He had lost over $200,000 to the so-called recovery hacker. I wish I could say that was the end of it, but desperation, once tasted, is hard to walk away from. As my father descended into guilt and despair, another offer came. This time it was different, more professional, more structured, or so it seemed. It came from a firm called Box Office and Cucker Partners, offering business optimization and rapid financial rehabilitation. They presented themselves as corporate consultants, not recovery agents. Their pitch was sophisticated. If we invested a final sum, they could restructure our debt, renegotiate with our lenders, and offer a high-yield return program to rebuild what was lost. My father didn't tell us this time, he simply acted. By the time we found out, the remaining equity in our home $70,000 had been transferred to them. It was only when the firm stopped answering calls and the website disappeared that he told us everything. This time, he didn't wait. He came into the living room and collapsed onto the floor, sobbing in front of us like a child. That was the moment it all fell apart. The image of him on his knees, broken, ashamed, and silent no more. We had lost everything. The house was in pre-foreclosure. The savings was gone. The credit cards were maxed out. My tuition fund had vanished. My mother's credit was destroyed. And all that remained was a paper trail of lies, empty promises, and names that likely didn't belong to real people. But the story wasn't over, because I, Amber, wasn't done. I didn't know how to fix what had been lost, but I knew how to trace, how to research, and how to dig. And I knew one thing for certain: I would find the truth, even if no one else cared. Even if justice never came, they thought they could disappear. They didn't know me yet. They say that when you lose everything, you begin to see with different eyes. That grief burns away the veil of assumption and makes room for clarity. I didn't understand what that meant until the morning I opened my laptop, wiped the dust from the family printer, and began to trace the people who had taken everything from us. My father was no longer the man I had grown up with. The past weeks had hollowed him. He sat most days by the window, staring at nothing. He didn't speak unless spoken to. When he did, his voice was flat and mechanical. Sometimes he apologized without context, a quiet "I'm sorry" drifting through the room when no one had said a word. My mother had picked up a part-time job at a bakery just to keep groceries in the house. She never complained. Her eyes told enough of the story: bloodshot from sleepless nights, jaw clenched with worry, hands trembling over the receipts she kept in a small zippered pouch. But I couldn't afford to break down. Someone had to stay standing. I started with Derek Voss, the hacker, the fake savior, the one who had played the role of rescuer while slowly draining what little hope we had left. At first, all I had was his emails, but then I found a detail he had overlooked: a tracking pixel embedded in one of his attachments. It was meant to monitor if my father had opened the file, a common tactic in phishing, but it left a trace, a signal. And I followed it. The link redirected to a server hosted in Romania. Not definitive proof, but a starting point. I dove deeper. Every email header, every routing path, every anonymized wallet. I started building a map, one string of data at a time. I traced Bitcoin wallet addresses across the blockchain. I used free forensic tools, forums filled with other victims, and the dark corners of the internet where digital ghosts sometimes left fingerprints. The more I searched, the more I discovered that Derek Voss was not a man but a shell, a persona, used by at least 4 different scammers across multiple platforms. One victim in Canada, another in Malaysia. A woman in Greece had lost her retirement fund to a similar deep tracing pitch. The same signature in the emails, the same attachments, the same result. Silence after the money was gone. I reached out to each of them. Some didn't answer. Others were broken in ways words couldn't express. But a few responded. They shared screenshots, invoices, and fake contracts, all eerily similar. Together, we created a shared drive, compiling everything. We didn't know if it would lead anywhere, but it felt like action. It felt like something. I also revisited Capitalix, the platform my father had first trusted, the entry point to this nightmare. It was still online, still polished and professional, still advertising miracle returns. I signed up with a burner email. Within minutes, I received a call from a man with a British accent calling himself Ethan Blake. He welcomed me to the platform and told me I was already on the path to financial freedom. I let him talk. I recorded everything. He asked me to deposit $250. I said I needed more time. He followed up 3 more times that week. I didn't want revenge. I wanted exposure. I wanted names, faces, and coordinates. Something real. Something that could be handed to authorities, published, spread, anything to stop them from doing to someone else what they had done to us. But the world wasn't built to help people like me. Not the world of international fraud. I contacted our local police station. They listened politely, took notes, and nodded with sympathy. But they didn't have a cyber division. They said they'd pass it along. I never heard back. Then I contacted Interpol's online reporting system. I submitted everything: the emails, IP traces, wallet addresses, and the recordings. I even printed it all and sent a physical binder. I don't know if it ever reached someone who could do something, but something shifted in me that week. I was no longer helpless. I created a blog. I titled it "The Hacker Who Took My Father." I published our story in full: the names, the tactics, the screenshots. I included links to government reporting portals, scam warning sites, and financial literacy resources. The post spread faster than I expected. Victims reached out from all over the world. Some had lost more than us. Some had nearly ended their lives. But the post also caught other eyes. 3 days after I posted the blog, I received an anonymous message. "You're making dangerous people nervous. Be careful." I stared at the screen for a long time. I didn't show it to my father. I didn't tell my mother. I just saved it in a hidden folder and locked it with a password. Fear returned, but this time it didn't paralyze me. It sharpened me. I kept digging. In the meantime, things at home worsened. Our house officially entered foreclosure. My father lost his job. The debt collectors became more aggressive. Letters came in red envelopes. We sold the second car. I dropped out of university, at least temporarily, and started working full-time. We were surviving, but just barely, and then the final blow came: an envelope with legal markings. A civil suit filed by a loan agency my father had unknowingly defaulted on. It was the last loan he had taken without telling us. It carried a balance of $32,000, and interest was growing fast. He hadn't even remembered applying for it. That night, after everyone had gone to sleep, I sat in the dark with the letter in my lap. The walls of our home, the same walls that had once held laughter, holiday lights, and quiet joy, felt heavy and hollow. I opened my laptop and began again. If The world wouldn't chase these people, I would. The illusion of reaching the bottom is a cruel one because just when you think you've hit it, you discover there's still more to lose. That's what chapter 4 of our lives felt like. We thought we had survived the worst, but what we didn't realize was that we were still bleeding, and the sharks hadn't even begun to circle. After exposing Derek Voss and his scam on my blog, I threw myself into research, constantly bouncing between data leaks, victim forums, and the deep web. I thought I was finally gaining control, but control was a mirage. We were still vulnerable, and they knew it. It started with a single phone call. My father, after weeks of silence, received a message from someone claiming to be from Box Office and Cucker Partners, a Swiss-based business rehabilitation firm. They had allegedly discovered his case through leaked fraud databases and wanted to offer him a structured recovery and optimization program. They didn't promise to recover what was lost. Instead, they used a different pitch: restructure, optimize, and rebuild. This wasn't a fake hacker hiding behind encryption. This was a polished, scripted, business-like scam with websites, contracts, and even a virtual assistant who called herself Isabel. She had a soft accent, spoke with corporate confidence, and offered financial planning tools, PDF documents, and signed letters. Everything looked clean, professional, real. That made it more dangerous than anything before. At first, my father ignored them. But then they sent a document, a risk summary portfolio showing how, if he deposited a fixed amount, they could restructure his outstanding debts, provide monthly interest returns, and eventually create a financial rehabilitation track that could, within 18 months, bring him back to pre-loss conditions. The document looked legitimate. It even had logos from regulatory bodies, ISO stamps, and a signature from a fake executive partner. I knew it was fake within 5 minutes of reading it. The text was littered with reused phrases from other known scams I'd cataloged. The regulatory stamps didn't match real agency logos. Even the PDF metadata said it had been edited with a free editor in Ukraine, but I didn't know my father had already spoken to them again. By the time I found out, it was too late. He had wired 70,000. When I confronted him, he couldn't even look at me. He said he didn't do it out of hope. He did it out of despair. It felt like the last door, he whispered. And when you've knocked on everyone, you take whatever opens. I wanted to scream. I wanted to shake him. But he looked so small, so much older than I remembered. In that moment, he wasn't just my father. He was a man who had been hollowed out by shame. The money was gone within 48 hours. Box Office and Cucker Partners stopped replying. The website was replaced with a fake under-maintenance screen. Isabel's number redirected to a generic voicemail. The email servers vanished. The phone lines went dead. And just like that, it was over. I had been so busy chasing ghosts from the past, I had missed the new trap unfolding right in front of us. This time, the collapse wasn't loud. It was quiet, cold, numb. My mother didn't cry. She sat on the floor of the kitchen and stared at the tiles for over an hour, unmoving. My father stopped speaking altogether for 2 days. He wouldn't eat. He wouldn't sleep. I had to unplug the internet router to keep him from trying to contact recovery agents again. That's when I realized the scams had become more than financial crimes. They had become a kind of psychological occupation. They knew who to target. Men like my father, responsible, proud providers. They knew how to disguise hope as logic. They knew how to manipulate people too ashamed to ask for help. It wasn't just about money anymore. It was about identity, and I had to do something. So I went public. I wrote a full expose on Box Office and Cucker Partners. I published a comparison of their documents with known fraud templates. I mapped the hosting domains to Russian IP addresses and created a timeline of every communication. I translated the site into Turkish, Portuguese, and Spanish because these scams weren't limited to one country or language. They were everywhere. The post went viral. This time, it didn't go unnoticed. A cybersecurity journalist contacted me. Her name was Lydia, and she had spent the last 2 years investigating organized scam networks operating out of Eastern Europe and the Middle East. We exchanged files. She confirmed what I had suspected. The box office scam was part of a larger, coordinated fraud operation tied to dozens of shell companies, fake legal firms, and encrypted wallet chains. She had names, faces, evidence. She introduced me to an independent investigator, someone who worked with digital rights groups and anti-fraud networks. His job was to trace money flows across borders, and he agreed to help me map where my family's money had gone. Together, we began constructing what he called a fraud genealogy, a network map showing how each scam evolved from another, how personas like Derek Voss were repurposed, how the same documents were rebranded, and how language was optimized over time. It was like studying a virus, how it mutated, spread, and adapted, and the deeper we went, the more dangerous it got. Some of the IPs led to active phishing campaigns tied to criminal syndicates. Others connected to data leak forums where victim information, including ours, had been bought and sold. I saw my father's name on a list titled High Trust Targets Recent Trauma. We were being watched, not as people, but as opportunities. I became paranoid. I changed every password. I encrypted our hard drives. I locked down our Wi-Fi. I deleted my blog and moved it to a hidden, private server. I set up alerts on every account I had, but I kept going, because now it was personal, not just about what had happened to my family, but about the machine that had turned grief into profit, that had built an industry on the backs of people too broken to fight back. The scams weren't just random, they were evolving, learning, praying with precision, and I wasn't going to wait for them to strike again. There is a moment in every story where something inside you snaps, not in rage or despair that had already come and gone, but in a quieter, colder way. It's the moment you stop hoping for help and start preparing for war. For me, that moment came when the bank official called to confirm the seizure date of our home. I had just come home from a night shift at the supermarket. My shoes were soaked in rainwater, my eyes burning from fluorescent lights. I hadn't even taken off my coat. My mother was at the kitchen table, hands covering her face. A legal envelope sat unopened beside her. My father wasn't there. He had begun disappearing for hours at a time, walking the streets and avoiding us. He hadn't spoken in 2 days. I picked up the envelope. It was real. Our house, the one I had grown up in, the one where every birthday candle and scraped knee and family photo had lived, was now officially on track to be foreclosed and auctioned. We had 60 days. That's when I broke, but not in the way I expected. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just walked to my room, closed the door, sat at my desk, and began building something, a timeline, a full, detailed, itemized timeline of everything that had happened to us. Every payment, every email, every phone call. I opened old email accounts, decrypted hidden folders, cross-referenced IP addresses, rebuilt spreadsheets, and labeled each interaction. I pulled data from my phone, my father's backups, and my mother's bank app. I categorized each scam phase by actor, amount, platform, and outcome. I turned our destruction into a case file. And then I started making noise. I called banks. I filed complaints with 3 different financial regulators. I sent hard drives of documentation to cybercrime units in multiple countries. I contacted journalists, influencers, YouTubers, lawyers, anyone with a platform. I turned our story into a weapon, not just to expose what had happened to us, but to warn others. Most ignored me, but some didn't. A podcast host invited me to share our story. A freelance investigator based in Berlin offered to trace the last known IP of the box office scammers. A Canadian woman who had lost her retirement fund introduced me to a private international task force of fraud victims, coders, analysts, and lawyers, all working unofficially to build cases where police had failed. They added my father's case to their database, and then came the break I didn't expect. Through one of the cryptocurrency tracing tools, I found a converging wallet, one that had received funds not just from my father, but from 3 other victims across 2 continents. It had moved over $1.7 million in less than 6 months. From there, the money split across hundreds of microwallets, then reassembled into a final destination. The final destination led to a Hong Kong-based shell corporation, and the domain registration tied back to a name I had seen before: Isabel Cooper, the assistant who had once soothed my father with her warm, false voice. It wasn't a real name, but it was a thread, and I pulled it. Using archived domain data, I discovered that Isabel Cooper had used the same business address in Hong Kong for 5 different consulting firms, all of which shared identical privacy policies and website footers, the same contact form, the same formatting, the same invisible code in the page header. It was a factory, a scam factory. Each company lasted 3 to 6 months before disappearing and rebranding. But now I had timestamps, domains, and connections, a fraud fingerprint. I compiled it all and sent it to the independent investigator I had been working with. He took the data and ran a wider scan, confirming that Isabel Cooper, or rather the people behind her, had ties to at least 14 other fraud cases in 6 countries. We presented this to the European Cybercrime Center via an intermediary contact. The response was polite, formal, distant. They thanked us. They said they'd forward it internally, but nothing happened, and all the while, my family continued to fall. My mother's health began to deteriorate. She started losing weight, waking up with panic attacks, and forgetting basic tasks. I began driving her to the hospital for anxiety medication and sleep therapy. My father, he became something else entirely. He stopped shaving, stopped changing clothes. He barely spoke. He would sit for hours staring at an unplugged television. One day, I found him in the backyard, shivering in the rain, muttering apologies to no one. I didn't know if we'd ever get him back. At work, I lied about everything. Said I was just taking time off school. Said my father was ill. I didn't have the energy to explain to strangers how a man could be destroyed by invisible wires and digital ghosts, but every night, I returned to the timeline. I updated it, I annotated it, I turned it into a presentation, and finally, I got one more message. A journalist from a major European media outlet had seen my blog reposted on a whistleblower forum. She wanted to write a feature story. She asked for documents, screenshots, and interviews. She promised to verify everything and tell the story as it deserved to be told. We worked together for 2 weeks. When the article was published, it was titled "The Digital Wound: How a Family Was Bled Dry by Scammers." It went viral. Suddenly, things began to change. People paid attention. I received calls from law firms offering pro bono consultation. A local government agency reached out to interview my father for a case study on financial abuse. The whistleblower task force requested more information. A private cybersecurity company offered to provide forensic support on tracing our funds. It was like the sky had cracked open, but only slightly, because despite the attention, the applause, and the sympathy, our money was still gone. Our home was still going to be taken. My parents were still broken. That's when I decided something I hadn't dared say out loud until that night. I would find the people who did this, and if no one else would bring them down, I would, even if it took everything I had left. There's no trumpet at the end, no dramatic knock on a villain's door, no tearful return of stolen money. Justice, when it arrives, comes quietly, and sometimes it doesn't come at all. I learned this during the final 60 days before we lost our home. We were packing boxes one evening when the first true breakthrough landed in my inbox. It came not from a police department, or Interpol, or some noble agency. It came from a hacker, not a fake one this time, a real one. He called himself Slate. He said he had seen our story on a darknet forum. He said he used to work with people like Derek Voss and the Box Office Network before he realized how many lives they'd ruined. He didn't want money, he just wanted to help someone for once. Naturally, I didn't trust him. But I listened. Over the next 2 weeks, Slate showed me things I hadn't known to look for: hidden wallet ray routes, dark pool mixers, and cryptographic fingerprints in fake government letters. He traced the Hong Kong shell company to a real financial management firm in Dubai that had been hijacked, its branding copied, its virtual office addresses spoofed. He found evidence that parts of the operation were being run through a call center in Lagos, subcontracted through 5 different levels of digital laundering. He wasn't a savior, but he gave me clarity. And then, something astonishing happened. A class action lawsuit was announced, organized by victims from 5 countries, represented by a European fraud litigation group. They had taken the research we had all gathered, every email, screenshot, wallet, and timestamp, and filed a criminal complaint in Luxembourg, where one of the scam's payment gateways had processed over $10 million in unregistered transactions. Our family was included in the victim list. It didn't promise justice. It didn't even promise restitution, but it promised that someone finally might be forced to answer. I showed the court documents to my father. He cried for the first time in months. Not out of hope, but out of something quieter. Closure, maybe. Or relief. Our house was gone by then. We moved into a small apartment with thin walls and stained floors, the kind of place where you hear your neighbors arguing through the vents. It wasn't home. Not yet, but it was something. I started school again part-time, took online classes, and waited tables on weekends. My mother began working at a library, slowly recovering her sense of self. My father started therapy, though he rarely spoke about it. He was different, still hollowed in places, but there were days when he laughed again, however briefly. I kept writing, I kept documenting, and eventually, I got one last message from Slate. He had shut down 2 scam domains that day, quietly, anonymously. He said something that stayed with me. Justice doesn't always come with a badge. Sometimes it comes from the shadows. He disappeared after that. No contact, no trace, but I didn't need more, because by then, I had made peace with what we'd lost and, more importantly, with what we'd survived. The scammers had taken our money, but they hadn't taken me. They hadn't taken my fire, or my voice, or my ability to fight back, and I knew, somewhere out there, someone else was reading our story. Someone else was on the edge of that same mistake. And maybe, just maybe, our story would pull them back before it was too late. That was my justice, not revenge, not victory, but a warning lit bright across the sky for anyone willing to see, and I would never stop telling it. Thanks for listening to my story with me. Don't forget to subscribe for more scam stories.